I am the prisoner of dimensions. Part 1. I could see through my blind eyes. The first thing I remember was the light. It was so bright it almost burned, like staring directly into the sun after years of darkness. I shouldn't have been able to see it. For 7 years, my world had been nothing but a heavy, endless void, a blackness that wrapped around me like a second skin. But now I could see. It didn't make sense. Why? How? I tried to blink it away, this light, thinking maybe it was a trick, some remnant of the dreams I had while I was wherever I was. But it was real, too real. My eyes were wide open, and the light wasn't going away. I could see through my blind eyes. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat, as I struggled to make sense of what was happening. Where am I? I mumbled, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar to my ears. Everything felt wrong. The cold air hit my skin, the sheets beneath me rustled as I moved, and the beeping of machines echoed around me. I tried to lift my head, but it felt heavy, disconnected from the rest of my body, as though it belonged to someone else. The room was sterile, bright, too bright. Hospital. I was in a hospital. But why? How did I get here? The last thing I remembered was the water, icy and unforgiving, dragging me down. I should have died there in the freezing depths, yet here I was, breathing, seeing. I blinked again, harder this time, willing the images in front of me to become clearer, sharper. A nurse was leaning over me, her face swimming into view. Her mouth was moving, but her words were muffled, like she was speaking underwater. My mind felt sluggish, like it was wading through mud just to process a single thought. And then, the shock hit me all over again. I could see. I shouldn't have been able to, but I could. 7 years. 7 years of blindness, and now, without any explanation, I was staring at the white ceiling tiles above me. Nothing about this made sense. The nurse said something, and I nodded, though I had no idea what she was talking about. I was too overwhelmed, too consumed by the sight in front of me. The world was sharper, clearer than I remembered. Even the edges of the machines around me felt too vivid, too real, as if my senses were heightened, more alive than before. The door to the room opened, and 2 figures rushed in. A man and a woman. They moved like they knew me, like they'd been waiting for this moment. My head spun as they came closer, their faces filled with worry, relief, something else I couldn't quite place. But I didn't know them. They were strangers to me. Prairie, the woman whispered, her voice trembling as she reached for my hand. I flinched, pulling back instinctively. The name. It echoed in my mind. Prairie. That was me, wasn't it? But it didn't feel right. It felt foreign, like a name that belonged to someone else. Her eyes, wet with tears, searched my face, desperate for something I couldn't give her. It's me, your mom, she said, her voice breaking. My mom. But she didn't look like the woman I remembered from my childhood. Her hair was streaked with grey, her face lined with worry, and her eyes looked so tired. The years had changed her, and I wondered if I'd changed too. The man beside her, my father, I assumed, looked at me like I was some kind of miracle. His hands shook as he reached for me, but he hesitated, as if he wasn't sure if I was real. What happened to me? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. They exchanged glances, their faces a mix of relief and something darker, something I couldn't quite read. You were gone, Prairie. For 7 years. We thought. Her voice trailed off, and I could see the weight of those years hanging between us. 7 years. Gone. It didn't feel real. I didn't feel real. Whose life am I living? The question clawed at the back of my mind. I could see now, but everything else felt wrong, like I'd woken up in a life that wasn't mine. These people, my parents, looked at me like I was their daughter, but I didn't feel like her. Not anymore. The memories of those years, wherever I had been, felt like a blur, just beyond my reach. There were flashes of faces, places, and feelings that I couldn't quite grasp. I had been someone else somewhere else, but now I was Prairie again, sitting in this hospital room with two people who thought they knew me. But I didn't know me. Not anymore. The nurse interrupted, telling my parents I needed to rest, that the doctors would be in soon to check on me. They nodded, but I could see the hesitation in their movements. They didn't want to leave me, not after everything, not after losing me once already. I felt their fear, their uncertainty, and it mirrored my own. They finally left, promising to be back soon. The room felt too quiet without them, too empty. I stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. The machines beeped around me, grounding me in the present. But my mind kept drifting back to the past. To the blind girl I had been. To the darkness that had been my constant companion for so long. I didn't understand how it was possible. How I could see. How I had come back. And the worst part was, no one seemed to have any answers. Not my parents. Not the doctors. No one. The questions circled around me, suffocating me. Where had I been? What had happened to me? How could I have been blind for so long, only to wake up one day with my sight restored? Whose life was I living now? The ceiling tiles blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't want to cry. I hated crying, but I couldn't stop the flood of emotions rising inside me. The fear, the confusion, the uncertainty of it all. Everything felt too big, too heavy to carry alone. I closed my eyes, trying to shut it all out, to retreat back into the darkness that had once been my world. But even that was gone now. The darkness had been replaced by light, by a new reality that I wasn't ready for. The nurse came in again, checking the machines, asking if I was in pain. I shook my head. The pain wasn't physical. It was deeper, lodged somewhere inside me where no one could reach. She left, and I was alone again, staring at the light. The light that shouldn't have been there. I didn't know who I was anymore. Not really. I was Prairie, but I was also someone else. Someone who had lived through something unimaginable. Something I couldn't remember. The questions echoed in my mind, relentless. Where had I been? Why had I come back? What had I seen? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I wasn't the same person who had disappeared all those years ago. I had changed, and nothing about this life, about me, felt right anymore. I wasn't ready to face whatever lay ahead. But I didn't have a choice. I had returned. And with that, everything had changed. Where did I bury my memories? I am Nina. Those words echo in my mind, faint but persistent, like a whisper carried on a breeze from a place long forgotten. She is Nina. I remind myself, trying to grasp what that means. It feels strange, like trying to remember a dream you've half forgotten. The moment you wake, Nina feels like a ghost, a shadow from a life I no longer recognize. I know I used to be her. I was Nina 1C, but I'm also Prairie now. Somehow in the space between my past and my present, I became someone else, and yet I don't believe in coincidences. There's a reason I became Prairie, why I buried Nina deep inside me, but I don't know why not yet. I lay in the hospital bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. For years my world was nothing but darkness, and now here I am back in the light, trying to make sense of the fragments of memories that keep slipping through my fingers. The doctors say I need time to heal, to adjust to seeing again, but it's not just the light that's too much, it's the memories, the thoughts, the pieces of me that feel like they don't belong. A memory. The room is quiet, except for the soft beeping of mockiness. My parents are gone, waiting anxiously somewhere outside, probably hovering in a hallway, too afraid to leave, but not sure how to be in the room with me either. I can feel their fear, their hesitation. They want answers just like I do, but the truth is, I don't have them. I don't know where I've been. I don't know how I've come back, and I don't know Who I am a memory. I close my eyes trying to summon the darkness that used to be my constant companion, but it doesn't call me. Instead, flashes of memories that feel foreign, like they belong to someone else, flicker behind my eyelids. I see a little girl, a young Nina, stumbling through her days in a world of shadows. She was blind, but she was strong. She had to be. I remember the coldness of the water from that day that took my sight. The day I became the blind girl, I was so young. The details are hazy, but I remember the ice-cold river, the feeling of being dragged under, the panic that gripped me as the world faded to black, and then darkness. For years that darkness was my reality. I learned to live in it, to navigate it. I had no choice. That's how I became a blind adult. For most people, childhood is a time of wonder, of exploring the world and discovering who you are. For me, childhood was darkness, literal and figurative. I was lost in more ways than one. My life as Nina, the little girl who once saw the world, was gone. In its place was a life defined by limitations, by dependency, by fear. But that wasn't all there was. There were whispers from somewhere else, another place, another life. Even as a child I could feel it. It was like a soft hum, something just beneath the surface of my reality, something I couldn't quite reach. I tried to ignore it at first, tried to focus on the life I was living, but it was always there, in the back of my mind, a presence, a feeling that there was more, that my life as Nina wasn't the whole story. Maybe that's why, when my parents came for me, I didn't resist. I let go of Nina, of the blind girl I had been, and I became someone else. Prairie. I told myself that Nina was gone, buried somewhere deep inside me, in a place where I wouldn't have to think about her anymore. But now, lying in this hospital bed, with my sight restored and my past clawing its way back to the surface, I realize that I can't ignore her anymore. Nina is a part of me, whether I like it or not. The sound of footsteps pulls me from my thoughts, and I open my eyes to see my parents, my adoptive parents, standing in the doorway. Their faces are filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. They don't know what to say, how to approach me. After all, I'm not the same girl they lost 7 years ago. When I look at them, it's like looking through a veil. I know they're my parents, at least that's what everyone tells me, but they don't feel like my parents. They're kind, loving, devoted, but there's a distance between us, a distance that's grown since I returned. I can see it in their eyes, the way they try to hide their fear behind smiles, the way they reach for me but hesitate just before their fingers touch my skin. I try to smile at them, to reassure them, but it feels hollow, forced. How do you pretend to be someone you're not? We sit in silence for a few moments, the air thick with unspoken questions. They're waiting for me to say something, to explain where I've been, what's happened to me. But I can't. I don't have the answers they're looking for. I'm glad you're okay, my mom finally says, her voice trembling just a little. She's trying to be strong for both of us, but I can see the cracks in her facade. I am too, I reply, though the words feel strange in my mouth. Am I okay? I'm here, I'm alive, and I can see again, but something inside me is broken, and I don't know how to fix it. My dad clears his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The doctors said your sight shouldn't have come back like this. It's a miracle. A miracle. That word hangs heavy in the air, like it doesn't quite belong here. Miracles are supposed to be joyful, aren't they? Something to celebrate. But this doesn't feel like a miracle. It feels like a mystery, one that's tied to the parts of my life I can't remember, the parts I'm too afraid to face. Do you remember anything? My mom asks, her voice so soft it's almost a whisper. About before? I shake my head. No, not really. It's all a blur. It's not a complete lie. I remember fragments, pieces of my past that come and go like the tide. But I don't remember enough. Not enough to make sense of it all. They exchange a glance, and I know what they're thinking. They think I'm hiding something. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm afraid of what I might remember if I let myself dig deep enough. Everything will come back in time, my dad says, though I can tell he doesn't really believe it. He's trying to comfort himself as much as me. You just need time. Time. It's all anyone ever talks about these days. Time to heal, time to adjust, time to remember. But I'm not sure time is what I need. What if the truth is something I can't face? What if remembering is the worst thing I could do? I force myself to focus on the present, to ground myself in the here and now. My parents are here. I'm safe. I'm alive. That should be enough. But it's not. It's never enough. Because there's something missing. A piece of me, buried deep beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Later, when my parents leave and the room falls into silence once more, the whispers return. Whispers from another life, from a place I can't quite reach. They're faint, barely there, but I can feel them. They're calling to me, urging me to remember, to dig deeper into the darkness I've been avoiding for so long. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since I returned, I let myself listen to them. It was years ago, before I became Prairie, before I buried Nina and all that came with her. I was a child, living in a world of darkness, trying to make sense of a life that didn't feel like my own. I had lost my sight, but more than that, I had lost myself. My adoptive parents were kind, patient, and loving. They took me in, gave me a new name, a new life. They tried to make me feel safe, to give me a sense of belonging. But I never quite fit. I was always the blind girl, always the outsider, always the one who didn't quite belong. But there was something else. Even as a child, I could feel it. Something pulling at the edges of my consciousness, something I couldn't explain. It was like a door, just out of reach, waiting to be opened. I didn't know what was on the other side, but I could feel it, just beneath the surface. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the life I was living, but it was always there, lurking in the background. The whispers. The feeling that there was more. More to my life, more to my story, more than I could understand. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? I barely understood it myself. It was easier to pretend, to be the blind girl, to accept the life that had been given to me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. The memories fade as quickly as they came, slipping through my fingers like water. But they leave something behind, a sense of urgency. There's something I need to remember, something important, something that could change everything. But I'm afraid. Afraid of what I might find. Afraid of who I might be if I dig too deep. I'm not just Prairie. I'm Nina too. And somewhere, buried deep within me, is the truth. I don't believe in coincidences. Everything happens for a reason. There's a reason I lost my sight, a reason I disappeared for 7 years, and a reason I've come back. But that reason is still hidden, waiting for me to find it. And I will, even if it destroys me. Captiva. I didn't know what to expect when I met him. Hap. He seemed so normal, almost kind, in a strange way. When he first spoke to me, his voice was calm, measured, filled with concern. He asked questions about my past, about my blindness, about the dreams that had haunted me ever since I lost my sight. He said he wanted to help me, that he understood me. He even made me believe for a moment that he cared. But Hap was a liar. It wasn't long before I realized that the man who offered me hope was the same man who would take everything from me. He took me into his home, promised me answers, promised me a path to my father. But that house, it wasn't a home. It was a trap. And I walked right into it. The memory of that day is still sharp, like a shard of glass lodged in my mind. I remember the way Hap smiled at me as he led me inside, the way his voice softened as he spoke, as if he wanted to lull me into a false sense of security. And it worked. I let my guard down. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. He led me down a long hallway, the air growing colder with each step. There was something wrong, something I couldn't quite place, but I pushed the feeling aside. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But then we reached a door, and when it opened, the truth hit me like a tidal wave. The glass prison. I can still see it in my mind, the sterile, cold space that would become my new reality. It wasn't just one room. It was a series of rooms, connected by walls of glass. Cages. We were like animals, trapped in these clear, soulless boxes, forced to look at each other but never touch, never feel the warmth of another person's presence. When Hap pushed me inside, the door shut behind me with a sickening finality. I turned to look at him, but there was no kindness in his eyes anymore. Only cold calculation. I remember the way my heart sank, the way my stomach twisted into knots as the realization washed over me. I was his prisoner. I rushed to the glass, pounding on it with my fists, screaming at him to let me go, to tell me what was happening, but Hap just stood there watching. He enjoyed it, I think. Watching the fear in my eyes, the panic rising in my chest. He thrived on it. And then he left, the door closing behind him with a soft click that echoed in the silence. I stood there, my hands pressed against the glass, my breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It didn't feel real. It couldn't be real. But it was. I wasn't alone in that prison. Not for long. It didn't take me long to realize that there were others. My fellow captives. At first, I didn't know their names. I only saw their faces, pressed against the glass walls of their own cages, their eyes wide with the same fear I felt. There was Homer, with his boyish face and haunted eyes. Rachel, quiet and withdrawn, like she'd already accepted her fate. And Scott, who carried his anger like a weapon, his fists always clenched, his body always tense, ready to fight even though there was no one to fight against. We didn't speak at first. How could we? The walls between us were too thick, not just physically but emotionally. We were all trapped in our own personal hells, struggling to understand how we had ended up there, how our lives had been ripped away from us in an instant. But eventually, the silence broke. It had to. It was Homer who spoke first. I remember the way his voice cracked as he called out to me, his words muffled through the glass but clear enough to understand. "Are you okay?" he asked, though we both knew the answer. None of us were okay. I don't know why, but he made me feel safe. Or as safe as I could feel in a place like that. Maybe it was his kindness, the way he looked at me with something other than fear or desperation. Maybe it was because he seemed to care, in a way that no one else had since I'd been taken. We started talking more, through the walls. At first, it was small things, where we were from, how we had ended up in Hap's grasp, but soon, our conversations turned deeper. We talked about our fears, our hopes, our dreams. It was Homer who kept me grounded, who reminded me that there was still something worth fighting for, even in the darkest moments. But the darkness, it was suffocating. I don't know how long we were in there. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Time lost all meaning. We were just trapped, suspended in this timeless, nightmare-like existence, waiting for something to change, but nothing ever did. Except for Hap. He was the constant. The one who held the keys to our freedom but never used them. He would come down, watch us from the other side of the glass, sometimes smiling, sometimes silent. He never answered our questions. He didn't have to. His experiments were his obsession, and we were just part of his sick game. Despair became my closest companion. It clung to me like a second skin, wrapping itself around my thoughts, whispering that there was no way out, that we were never going to escape. I tried to fight it. We all did. But the longer we were there, the harder it became to hold on to hope. I can't describe the depths of the despair we all felt. There were days when I didn't want to move, didn't want to eat, didn't want to live. What's the point in surviving when you have no control over your life? When every breath you take feels like a reminder of your captivity. But then, one day, something shifted inside me. I don't know what it was, But I decided I wasn't going to let Hap win. I had to try to escape. Even if it meant risking everything, I had to make an attempt. It started with the first attempt. Homer and I had talked about it endlessly, planning in hushed whispers, careful not to let Hap catch on. We watched his every move, studying his patterns, trying to find a moment, any moment, when we might have the chance to act. It wasn't easy. Hap was smart, always one step ahead, always watching us, waiting for us to slip up. But we had hope, Homer's hope, and it was enough to make us believe that we could outsmart him. We decided to wait for a day when Hap was distracted, when he was too focused on his experiments to notice us. I still remember the way my heart raced as we put our plan into action, the way my hands trembled as I tried to open the door to my glass cage, the fear that coursed through my veins as I thought about what might happen if we were caught. But we were caught. Hap was always watching, always aware. He knew what we were planning before we even made our move. I remember the look on his face when he found us, the disappointment, the anger, the way his eyes seemed to burn with a cold, calculated fury. He didn't say anything as he dragged me back to my cell, didn't say a word as he locked the door behind me and walked away. I remember the sound of the door closing, the heavy finality of it, like a death sentence. And for a moment, I let despair wash over me again. We had failed. We had tried to escape, and we had failed. But Homer didn't give up. He was the one who kept me going, even after our first failed attempt. He told me that we couldn't stop trying, that we couldn't let Hap win. There's always another way, he would say, his voice filled with a quiet determination that I couldn't help but believe. That's when we started to bond, really bond. Homer and I became inseparable, our connection growing deeper with each passing day. We would talk for hours about anything and everything. Our pasts, our families, our dreams for the future. He told me about his life before he was taken, about the things he missed, the things he wished he could change. And I told him about my blindness, about the darkness that had defined so much of my life, about the strange, otherworldly experiences that I could barely put into words. There was something about Homer that made me feel safe, even in the most dangerous of circumstances. He was my anchor, the one thing I could hold on to in a world that had been turned upside down. And he never stopped believing that we could escape. We talked about it endlessly, whispering through the glass walls, coming up with new plans, new strategies, new ways to outsmart Hap. But the truth was, we were running out of options. Hap was too smart, too careful, too aware of our every move. He had us trapped, and there was no way out. But that didn't stop us from trying. It was Homer's hope that kept me going, even in the darkest moments. He refused to give in to despair, refused to let Hap break us. And because of him, I refused too. We were prisoners, yes. But we weren't broken. Not yet. There was still something inside us, something that Hap couldn't touch, no matter how hard he tried. Our humanity. Our connection to each other. The hope that one day, we would be free. It wasn't easy. Every day was a battle. A struggle to hold on to the pieces of ourselves that Hap was trying to strip away. But as long as we had each other, as long as we had hope, we could survive. And so we did. Day after day, week after week, month after month. We survived. Because we had no other choice. But survival isn't the same as living. And deep down, I knew that as long as we were trapped in that glass prison, as long as Hap had control over us, we weren't truly alive. But we had each other. And that was enough. For now. As long as we kept hoping, as long as we kept fighting, we still had a chance. A chance to escape. A chance to live again. And I wasn't going to let Hap take that away from us. Not ever. Homer was my hope. Homer was the first person to speak to me after I was taken. His voice broke through the isolation, muffled as it was through the thick walls of glass, but it reached me. It reached the part of me that still believed in something, still believed in hope. We made a plan that day, Homer and I, though we didn't know it yet. That first conversation was the beginning of something, the seed of what would keep us alive, what would keep us fighting. In the beginning, we didn't talk about escape. It was too soon, and we were still too broken. Hap had made sure of that. He knew how to keep us caged, not just physically but mentally. He controlled everything, the air we breathed, the food we ate, the light that flickers on and off, marking our days and nights. But he couldn't control what happened between us, what we shared through the walls of our prisons. Our conversations through the walls were our lifeline. They kept us sane, kept us connected. At first, it was small things, whispers of reassurance, questions about who we were before Hap took us. It wasn't easy, talking like that. The walls distorted everything, made it hard to hear, hard to feel real. But Homer made it feel real. His voice, steady, warm, with just a hint of something I couldn't place, was my anchor. I remember the first time he asked me my name. It was such a simple question, but it caught me off guard. "What's your name?" he asked through the glass, his voice soft but insistent. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. Was I Prairie? Or was I still Nina? The girl who had lived through darkness, the one who had lost so much. It took me a long time to say it out loud. "Prairie," I finally whispered, my voice cracking with the weight of everything that name had carried. I could hear him smile, even though I couldn't see it. "That's a beautiful name," he said, and in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since I'd been taken, I didn't feel so alone. Homer told me about his life, about the things he missed most. He missed surfing, the way the ocean felt beneath him, the freedom of it. He missed his family. The little things, like how his mother used to sing to herself when she thought no one was listening. He missed being outside, feeling the sun on his face, the wind in his hair. As he spoke, I closed my eyes, trying to imagine it, trying to hold on to the world outside of Hap's prison. That's when we started dreaming of escape. It started as a fantasy, something to keep us sane, something to cling to when the despair became too much. We whispered about it through the walls, late at night when the lights were dim, when Hap was upstairs in his world, oblivious to the plans we were starting to form. "What if we got out of here?" Homer would say, his voice filled with that quiet, persistent hope. "What would you do?" I didn't know how to answer at first. I couldn't picture a life outside of that glass cage. It felt too far away, too unreal. But Homer, he made it feel possible. He had this way of talking about the future as if it was something real, something we could reach if we just tried hard enough. He made me believe, even when I didn't want to. He'd talk about walking on the beach, about feeling the sand between our toes, about breathing in the fresh, salty air. "We'll do it," he'd say. "We'll get out of here, and we'll live." And for a moment, I'd believe him. I'd let myself imagine it. The sky. The wind. Freedom. But then reality would crash back down. Hap was always there, looming over us like a shadow we couldn't shake. He controlled everything. Every moment of our lives, every breath we took, was on his terms. And the worst part was, he was always watching. Even when we thought we were alone, we knew he could see us, hear us. He had cameras everywhere, listening devices we couldn't escape. We watched Hap's every move, waiting for him to slip, waiting for a moment when he wasn't looking, when we might have a chance. But Hap never slipped. He was too careful, too methodical. He had been doing this for too long. We learned to watch him, to study him, just as he studied us. Every time he came down into our glass prisons, we paid attention. How long did he stay? What was he carrying? Was he distracted? We noticed everything, every small detail. It was all we had, these tiny fragments of information, these glimpses of his routine. We clung to them, hoping they would give us the edge we needed. But it wasn't just about escape. It was about survival. Hap had his own plan, his own sick obsession with what lay beyond life and death. He was always watching us, waiting for the right moment to push us to the brink, to force us into those near-death experiences that he believed would unlock the mysteries of the universe. I could see it in his eyes, the way they lit up whenever one of us returned from the edge, the way he hung on every word we said about what we saw, what we felt. It terrified me. I knew that if I didn't stay strong, if I let myself fall too deep into despair, Hap would win. He would break me. And I couldn't let that happen. Not for me, and not for Homer. Homer was my hope, just as much as I was his. We needed each other. We needed to believe that there was a way out, even if we didn't know what it was yet. Then came the first glimmer of hope. It was small, almost insignificant. A moment that might have seemed ordinary if we weren't so desperate for something to hold on to. Hap had been careless. He left something behind, something he wasn't supposed to. A set of keys, resting on the counter just outside our glass cages. It was a mistake, a tiny slip in his otherwise flawless routine. I saw them first, the keys, glinting in the harsh fluorescent light. My heart raced, my mind spinning with the possibilities. Could this be it? Could this be our chance? I whispered to Homer, my voice trembling with excitement. The keys. They're right there. I didn't need to say anything else. He knew what I was thinking, what we were both thinking. But it wasn't that simple. Nothing was ever simple in that place. The keys were there, yes, but so was the glass. So were the cameras. So was the ever-present threat of Hap coming back at any moment. We couldn't just reach out and grab them. We had to be careful. We had to plan. That night, as the lights dimmed and the silence settled over us like a blanket, we started to talk. We made a plan, a real plan this time, not just a fantasy whispered through the walls. We spoke in hushed tones, careful not to let Hap hear us, careful not to let the cameras catch too much. Homer was the strategist. He was the one who thought of every detail, every possible obstacle. He told me that we couldn't rush it, that we had to wait for the perfect moment, the moment when Hap would be too distracted, too focused on his experiments to notice what we were doing. "We'll get out of here," he whispered through the glass, his voice filled with that unshakable hope that I had come to depend on. "We just have to be patient." Patience wasn't easy. Every day felt like an eternity, every second ticking by with agonizing slowness as we waited for our chance. But we had each other. And that made all the difference. We kept watching, kept studying Hap, looking for the patterns, the moments when he let his guard down. He didn't know we were paying attention. He didn't know that we were waiting for him to slip up again. And then, finally, he did. It was late, late enough that the world above us was asleep, but Hap was still working, still lost in his obsession. I could hear him moving around upstairs, his footsteps heavy, his movements rushed. He was distracted. We could feel it. Homer whispered through the glass, his voice tense with anticipation. "Now," he said. "Now's our chance." My heart raced, my hands trembling as I nodded. This was it. The moment we had been waiting for. We moved quickly, silently, our movements rehearsed, careful not to make a sound that would alert Hap to what we were doing. I reached for the keys, my fingers brushing against the cool metal. For a moment, I thought we had done it. I thought we were going to escape. But then, in an instant, everything went wrong. Hap appeared, his face twisted with rage, his eyes burning with a fury I had never seen before. He was faster than I expected, faster than we had planned for. He grabbed me before I could react, his hand closing around my wrist with a grip that sent pain shooting up my arm. Homer shouted through the glass, his voice filled with panic, with desperation. But it was too late. We had failed. Hap dragged me back to my glass cage, his breath hot against my skin as he shoved me inside. I stumbled, falling to the ground as the door slammed shut behind me. My heart was pounding, my mind racing, but all I could think about was Homer, about how close we had come, about how we had almost made it. Hap stood there for a moment, his eyes locked on mine, his expression cold and calculating. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look on his face said it all. We were never getting out. As he turned and walked away, the weight of the failure crushed me, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I sat there, staring at the glass, my body trembling with the force of my emotions. We had tried. We had come so close. But it wasn't enough. But then, through the silence, I heard Homer's voice. "It's not over," he whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with that same unshakable hope. "We'll try again." I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. It wasn't over. It couldn't be. We had failed this time, yes, but that didn't mean we would fail again. Because we had each other. And as long as we had each other, there was still hope. Homer was my hope. The experiments. Hap's obsession was the only constant in our world of glass cages. When your obsession is death, you stop seeing people as people. You start seeing them as experiments. That's what we were to him, nothing more than subjects in his relentless pursuit of the truth behind death. Every time he looked at us, I could see it in his eyes, the hunger, the fascination. He wasn't interested in our suffering or our fear. He was only interested in what we saw when we died. Because to him, death wasn't the end. It was a doorway. And we were the keys. I didn't understand it at first. None of us did. The way he spoke about death as though it wasn't something to be feared, but something to be sought out. He would come down into the basement, his hands steady, his voice calm, and talk to us about things that no sane person would ever say. "It's not about the pain," he'd say, as if that made it better. "It's about what's beyond the pain. What's on the other side." The first time he took me, I didn't know what was happening. I had heard whispers through the glass walls. Homer and the others had talked about it, about the way Hap would take one of us and bring us to his lab. But nothing they said could prepare me for what it felt like, for the terror of realizing that you're about to die, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Hap didn't explain. He never explained. He didn't need to. He believed that we would understand once we crossed over, once we experienced what he was so desperate to discover. I remember the cold metal of the table beneath me, the way the restraints dug into my wrists and ankles, holding me in place. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind racing with panic, but there was nothing I could do. He started talking as he prepared the equipment. His voice was calm, almost soothing, but his words were anything but. "I've studied death for years," he said, as if this was some kind of casual conversation. "But no matter how much I learn, there's always more. There's always something just out of reach. And that's why I need you." I stared at the ceiling, my breathing shallow, trying to hold on to something, anything that would keep me grounded. But there was nothing. Only the cold, only the fear. Hap moved around the room with quiet efficiency, his focus entirely on the task at hand. He didn't see me as a person lying there on the table. He didn't see me as prairie. I was just another body, another step in his endless search for the truth. And then, without warning, it began. The feeling of drowning, the suffocating pressure in my chest, the way the edges of my vision blurred and darkened until there was nothing left but the sound of my own heartbeat, slowing, until it stopped. The first near-death experience was like falling into the void. One moment, I was there on that table, my body fighting for air, for life. And the next, I was gone. I had crossed over, into the place where Hap so desperately wanted to go, but couldn't.
ISAV so meeting on the other side.
It's hard to describe, even now, what it felt like. It wasn't like being asleep, or dreaming. It was something else. Something more. I was standing in front of a vast, endless expanse, like a river that stretched out in both directions, as far as I could see. And on the other side of that river, there was a woman. She was beautiful, in a way that felt otherworldly, her presence calming yet powerful.
Katon.
That was her name. She didn't speak it aloud, but I knew it. Somehow, deep in my soul, I knew who she was, even though I had never seen her before. Katon was there waiting for me, and when our eyes met, I felt something stir inside me. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Like I had known her all along, like she had been waiting for me to return to her. She didn't say much, but what she did say changed everything. "You are the original angel," she told me, her voice soft but strong. "You have a purpose beyond this life." Her words echoed in my mind, filling the empty space where fear had once been. I didn't understand what she meant, not then, but I knew it was important. I knew that what I was experiencing wasn't just a vision. It was real. More real than anything I had ever felt. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. I was being pulled back, yanked out of that otherworldly place and shoved back into my body. The pain returned first, sharp and immediate, followed by the desperate need to breathe to live. I gasped, my lungs burning, my chest heaving, and for a moment, I was sure I had died. But I hadn't. Hap stood over me, his eyes gleaming with excitement, his hands shaking just slightly as he scribbled down notes. He didn't look at me, not really. He didn't ask how I felt, if I was okay. He only cared about what I had seen, about what I had brought back from the other side. But I couldn't speak. I could barely move. I just lay there, trembling, my mind reeling from what had just happened. I had crossed over. I had died. And I had come back. Returning to the prison after that first experience was like waking up from a nightmare, only to realize that the nightmare was real. The glass walls, the cold, sterile environment. It all felt even more suffocating than before. I had glimpsed something beyond this world, something bigger, something I couldn't explain. And now I was back trapped, and I didn't know how to process it. Homer was waiting for me. He always was. I could see the worry in his eyes, the way he leaned toward me, his hands pressed against the glass as if he could somehow reach through and pull me into his arms. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, but I didn't feel okay. I felt like something inside me had shifted, like a part of me had stayed on the other side and I wasn't sure I'd ever get it back. He wanted to know what had happened. They all did. Rachel, Scott, they had all been through it, just like I had. We were all part of Hap's twisted experiment, all victims of his obsession. But none of them had seen what I had seen. None of them had met Katon. I didn't tell them about her. Not at first. I couldn't. How could I explain something that I didn't even understand myself? How could I tell them that I had seen something that felt more real than this prison we were trapped in? I didn't want to scare them. I didn't want them to think I was losing my mind. But Homer, he understood. He always did. Even when I couldn't find the words to explain what I had seen, he knew. "We're going to get out of here," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We're going to find a way." But I wasn't so sure. Uncertainty clung to me like a shadow, dark and heavy, pressing down on my chest. What was I supposed to do with what I had seen? What was the point of it? Was I supposed to die again? Was that what Katon meant when she said I had a purpose? I didn't know. I didn't know anything anymore. Hap kept pushing us, kept taking us to the edge over and over again. Each time, it felt like a little piece of me was slipping away, like I was losing myself to the darkness. I would cross over, see Katon, hear her whispers, but each time, it felt more distant, more fragile. I didn't know how much longer I could do it, how much longer I could keep coming back. And then there were the others. Rachel, Scott, even Homer. We were all breaking, in our own ways. Hap didn't care. He watched us, studied us, but he never saw us as people. We were his experiments, his keys to unlocking the mysteries of life and death. But I had seen something he never would. I had seen the other side, and it had changed me. It had given me a purpose, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. I started to feel it then, deep inside me, a pull, a quiet, steady force that wouldn't let me give up. There was something I had to do. Catan had shown me that. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew I had to survive. I had to keep fighting. Not just for me, but for all of us. Because we weren't just prisoners. We were something more. That knowledge didn't make the days any easier. They still stretched out in front of us, long and endless, marked only by the times Hap would come down and take one of us back to his lab. We still talked through the walls, whispering our fears, our hopes, our plans. But now, there was something else. A flicker of understanding, a sense that we were part of something bigger, something that Hap couldn't see. But there was still so much I didn't know. So much I couldn't explain. The uncertainty was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, filling the spaces between our conversations, between the moments of silence. Would we ever escape? Would we ever find a way out of this glass prison, out of Hap's control? I didn't know. But what I did know was that I couldn't stop fighting. I couldn't stop believing. Because I had seen the other side. I had seen Catan, and I knew, deep in my soul, that there was more to this life than Hap's experiments. There was more to me than just being his prisoner. I was the original angel. And somehow, that meant I had a purpose.